McCleary versus State was a court case filed on behalf of two families who asserted that the state was not properly funding schools. They claimed that despite their obligation, the state was failing to meet its paramount duty to make ample provisions for the education of all children residing within its borders. McCleary stated there was not ample funding for schools, including funds for staff salaries, maintenance, school buses, and K-3 class size reduction. Washington State believed that they were amply funding education despite the claims otherwise. McCleary saw the corner-cutting schools were doing regarding funding, but Washington State highlighted components such as their fully funded, highly capable program. In January of 2007, a lawsuit was filed by two families declaring that the state of Washington was not providing the required amount of funding needed for education as the state constitution says it should. Stephanie McCleary was a district employee and parent of the local school district. She noticed that they were cutting corners in education and not fulfilling what the children needed. King County Superior Court found the state was failing to meet the adequate funding for a basic education. Eventually, the case made it all the way to the Washington Supreme Court. In 2012, the Washington State Supreme Court ruled in the plaintiff's favor in McCleary versus Washington. The court said that the state was not meeting its constitutional mandate to fund public education. Their response stated, quote, "It is the paramount duty of the state to make ample provisions for the education of all children residing within its borders, without distinction or preference on account of race, color, caste, or sex." While this appeared to be a slam-dunk victory for education in the state of Washington, the time in court for McCleary was far from over. In 2014, the Washington State Supreme Court found the state in contempt of court as they deemed that what the state legislature called fully funded did not match what the court had intended. The Washington State Supreme Court fined the state $100,000 per day for being out of compliance with their ruling. In 2015, the state legislature passed an operation budget that included $1.3 billion for education. However, that was far short of the $5 billion needed each year to properly fund education, according to the McCleary plaintiffs. The Supreme Court continued to fine the state $100,000 per day even after the 2015 budget went into effect. In 2017, the Washington State Legislature raised statewide property tax rates in an effort to address educator salaries. Finally, in 2018, with an additional $800 million in funding for education passed by the legislature, the state finally came into compliance with the McCleary ruling, and on June 7th, the Washington State Supreme Court finally ended the $100,000 per day fine. As we move forward, there are several long-term consequences of McCleary, many of which are positive. However, several challenges remain. Eric Suchsdorf, an associate principal at Battleground High School, sees firsthand how the McCleary ruling is not as straightforward as many thought it would be.
Well, what I would say is the idea and motive behind the McCleary is great. Where the struggle is there are a lot of stipulations and loopholes that districts have to jump through and figure out before any of that money is rewarded.
The McCleary ruling no longer allows local school districts to seek local dollars to fund education as they wish, since this was deemed to create inequalities among school districts. In the mind of the public, levies were to be a thing of the past. Unfortunately, this is not how it has played out. Suchsdorf explains.
So the idea that a McCleary is going to fully cover education is amazing, and I know that our state is working to get there, but it's not happening right now. So where we are stuck is, instead of using levies and bonds to get ahead, we're using levies and bonds to backfill all of the gaps and holes that are left from the state not funding our districts, which is, it's challenging because the information out there is that Washington State fully funds education, and we are heading in that direction, but we are not there yet.
Over the past decade, debate has raged in Olympia as to how the state will fully fund schools amidst a public divided. Unfortunately, with the recent economic downturn caused by the COVID-19 global pandemic, Washington State has seen a reduction in its tax revenue, which will make it even more difficult to find the funds to stay in compliance with the McCleary ruling. Today, 14 years after McCleary was filed, the saga is still being written, and no one truly knows what the future holds for educational funding in the state of Washington. But thanks to Stephanie McCleary, the spotlight will remain bright, and legislatures will have to constantly make an effort to make education for all children their paramount duty of the state.